give and they get. Then they run around town beating their chests like they forget. I can forget for now, but I won't never forget. No, love how I feel, knowing the universe got my back. Whoa, love how I feel, knowing that money gon' come right back.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Journey Podcast. We are in Atlanta, joined by cousin Jake.
How are
We're
you
redoing
doing?
this intro because Jake forgot to hit the record button.
It was supposed to be more serious from the start, but
yeah. Like I said, this is going to be an insane episode, and this is the first time on the podcast that someone is going to share a story like yours. We've had insane stories, and I think after hearing your story, listening to you, watching you on Soft White Underbelly, the listeners are in for a treat. You know what I'm saying? Just because, like, this is the shit that people need to hear. And like you said, like, you want to make people feel like they're not alone. So thank you for joining us, Seth Gehle.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, it's always an honor to get on here and talk and share my story. You know, the more times, every time I do it, there are always people that reach out, and it's like a Me Too kind of statement. Like, they've been through the same things. I'm kind of sharing their story through my words, things that they can't say. I've been able to vocalize and like talk about in a pretty matter of fact way. I think I have a rare approach to everything that I've been through and kind of how I've overcome it. So that's the reason why I do it. That's the reason why I share it. It's it's pretty powerful. It's an intense story for sure. You know, it's not something that it's hard to sit in. It's hard to listen to. It's hard to talk about. But I think the more that we do it, the easier it kind of gets, you know? So that's the reason why I do what I do.
Yeah. And I think for, like, obviously what you went through, that is one of the things that you see a lot of people hold on to and never release, right? Like, there's certain things that you go through in your childhood that maybe you hold on to, but eventually you get comfortable to talk about it. But, you know, that abuse that you went through, I've seen it a lot of, like, you can tell someone went through something as a kid and they just won't let it out. But you can tell, like, there was something early on that fucked them up. And so, yeah, I just think it's inspiring for you to be able to be that comfortable and then tell it on such a large scale, like a platform like Soft White Underbelly. And then you're doing interviews and you wrote a book about it and you're coming on this platform. So I just think, I think what you're doing is it's helping a lot of people. You know, it really is.
I think it's interesting you said that because on the way over here, I was thinking about, I've thought about this a lot. Like, one, why it took me so long to tell my story. Yeah, I guess so why it took me so long to tell my story. And I think I had to build up this, like, persona or this I had to build up this personality or this identity of who I was before I could share what happened to me. And it's unfortunate that that is the case, because what happened to me doesn't necessarily define me. It's not the only thing. Like, when people come out and they say that they have been sexually abused or molested or raped or anything like that, we automatically, because that's such an intense and personal situation, we automatically look at those people like they're a victim or they're a survivor, or like that is the thing about them, right? And when in reality, there's so much more to me than just that, right? Like, I'm not just a sexual abuse survivor or whatever you want to call it. And so for me, I think the reason why it took me so long was because I needed to build up, like I said, a persona. I needed to build up this identity. So I went and accomplished a bunch of things first, so that when I came out and tell my story, yes, I went through a lot of crazy shit, but I'm also like a combat veteran, ultra runner, you know, award-winning construction professional, husband, father. Like, I'm all of these other great things. So I was like building up this, like, almost like a defense, you know? So if anybody came at me sideways and blamed me or attacked me or made fun of me or whatever they wanted to do, I could just hold up this list of, like, accolades, like, look at all of these other things. And not that that's right necessarily, but it's like a defense mechanism, you know? I thought about that on the way here. I was like, man, you know, because once I accomplished all of those things, telling my story at that point was like, yeah, I've been through a lot of hard shit, but I'm not broken. Like, I'm not defeated. You know, I try to be somewhat inspiring or I want to be something that somebody could look up to, you know? I think that maybe the person under the bridge who's addicted and homeless, they probably have a lot of great advice at life, or they have a lot of perspective of like this dark place in the world that people get put in. Unfortunately, nobody listens to them because they're homeless and addicted and under the bridge, you know? And so I guess that's why I kind of wanted to build up this, like I said, this identity of being somebody who's an overcomer, you know, not getting defeated by their circumstances. So it's interesting. It's difficult to talk about these things and share for people to share their stories. And I guess the last thing I'll say to that point is, you know, the average age of reporting is 53 years old. So whenever this happens to somebody, they usually don't say anything for their entire lives. And only 1 in 10 will report. So for every one, there's 9 others out there who will never say anything about it. And they just live with it inside their bodies forever, you know, and it's debilitating to you. Like, it's hard to even survive with that just like stuck in your heart or your mind. So
what are you feeling before sharing any of it? Is there like a heaviness on your heart? I've never experienced anything like you have. And I don't know. Like, I think people walk around carrying bags of shit, and especially if they haven't let it out. But you have let it out. So even in this environment, the lights are on. And how are you feeling right now?
So I kind of get two feelings. One, sometimes I get very excited sometimes, like in a way of like, I'm excited to share my story and like talk about it. And because I know it helps people, like I get excited for that reason. If I'm speaking at like a conference or something like that in front of an audience, and I get like this sometimes in this kind of environment too, I will get hired to come to an event and speak. Okay. People will literally pay for my travel, like get Seth Gehle on this stage. We want to hear his story. And when I get out there, I feel like they want to hear something else. Like, I don't think that they want to hear my story. I don't think that, for some reason, I start dealing with this like doubt and this like imposter syndrome where I'm about to start sharing my story and people are not going to, they just don't care. Sometimes I feel like that, you know? So that's part of the challenge. One of the challenges that I'm dealing with right now is when I start to share my story, I feel like every time people don't want to hear my story. I feel like it doesn't have much to offer. And so I've made the mistake before of talking about my story and trying to implement other people's like messages in it, you know? So like
to like give it credibility almost.
Well, so I was getting ready for a speaking engagement that I had last week. And about a month ago, when I was kind of developing the message that I was going to put out to these people, it was completely unrelated to my story. It was about like, it's going to sound funny, but it was about like being disciplined and consistent to be successful. And I was speaking to first responders about my story. And my story, quite honestly, there is levels of discipline and consistency that I could talk about. But my story, when I'm speaking to an audience, it's an emotional story. Like, if you're going to hire me to come and speak, it's emotional. Like, if you're going to listen to my story, it's going to be very emotional. It's going to be charging. It's going to be very personal, like human, right? And so I guess I was trying to take other things that I like and put them into my story, and it just wasn't who I am. It's not like, my story isn't the place for that, you know? Mm-hmm. If you're going to go talk to like entrepreneurs or whatever, maybe that's the case, but my story is it's a very personal and emotional story. And so sometimes I don't leverage that human emotion because as a man, I'm just like, sometimes I'm like, dude, this is like, people don't want to hear this shit, you know, but I'm wrong in that, you know, people are like literally reaching out to me and, you know, like I said, hiring me to come and speak. And so they do want the Seth Gehle story, right? So that, to answer your question, those are kind of the two emotions that I feel. Sometimes I feel like I'm very excited because I think it's going to help somebody. But then also, like I said, I have this like doubt that it's just not going to land. And like, people are going to be bored or they're going to be, ready for me to shut up. And 9 times out of 10, I walk off the stage and there's a line of people that want to talk to me, you know, and I say that humbly, but it's proof to like this self-doubt that we put on ourselves, you know, where we think like what we're doing doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to make an impact. And lo and behold, every time it does, every single time, you know, so it's cool.
Yeah. I guess let's dive into it.
Sure.
You know, I want you to just start at your childhood and obviously the relationship you had with your mom and your sister, and then weaving into everything that transpired, but then also like kind of still going back to mom times, right? So I want you to kind of just give us the rundown and I guess just try to paint the picture for us and the listeners of like what you actually went through. Because I think even just us listening to it on a screen on YouTube is totally different than like trying to put yourself in your shoes, you know, because everyone can have opinions of what you should have done, what you could have done, what you shouldn't have done, you know. It's like you don't know until you've been like in that shit. So yeah, just the floor is yours.
Yeah, great points there. So I was born and raised in Northwest Ohio, small town, Lima, Ohio. To me, it felt like a big city growing up. There's like 40,000 people, but it felt like a big city to me because we had like little to no supervision. So I was always out running around the streets, riding bikes with friends, doing all the things. I grew up with a single mother. So I grew up with my mom and my 2 sisters. My father spent most of my life in prison. He and my mother got into a fight when I was probably about 2 years old. And it's a he said, she said at this point, but he ended up stabbing her behind the ear and almost kills her. So he goes to prison. And I don't have any memories of my father as a child. There are pictures of us, but I just don't have any memories of those moments, you know.
For attempted murder, he goes to prison for?
I'm not sure what the charge was. Yeah, I don't know.
But it's serious.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was gone long enough for me to not know who he was or not have any memories for a long time. During my youth, at 5 years old, my mom would work all day so that she could be with us at night. Me and my sisters were all 1 year apart. So I was 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there. And my mom, she would be working. So we would get home from school and we'd be home until 5 or 6 o'clock at night every day. You know, she'd come home, cook dinner, we'd go to bed. She'd be there in the morning and then we'd go to school, she'd go to work. And we lived like that for several years. But during that time at 5 years old, I remember being in kindergarten and being at home alone with my sisters, and we found my mom's porn. She had like a porn collection or stash or whatever. And so we started watching these VHS tapes, like full-blown porn. It wasn't like clips. I mean, it was the full thing. And so at that young age, porn can be very compelling or captivating. You know, it's just got your mind and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And it's very detrimental. It's so detrimental to a young child's mind. And it began to shape my perception of love, affection, relationships, women. At 5, 6 years old, I began to fantasize about women and girls. And so due to that happening, I ended up trying to have sex with another girl who was my age, who's 5, 6 years old, in my closet. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of recreating the scene that I had, you know, watched on the tapes. My mom opens up the closet door. She asked me like what we're doing. I said nothing, trying to hide it. She asked the girl, I can't remember what she says, but then my mom yanks me out of the closet and basically proceeds to beat the shit out of me for a few minutes. And yeah, so that was like a very strange kind of childhood experience. During these moments too, or during these years, sometimes my mom would have to take us to a babysitter's house. So we were babysat occasionally. And sometimes it would be for a week or 2 at a time, or maybe 3 weeks. We'd stay at a babysitter's house. And my mom was like, quote unquote, you know, getting her shit together is what she would always tell us. I don't know what she was doing in those times, but she couldn't afford to take care of us. So we would stay with different babysitters. And one of the babysitters that I stayed with, they had a teenage son who ended up molesting me as well around that same time. And I remember him pulling me up into his bunk at night. And I don't know how old he was. All I know is he looked like a grown man and I was still a child, you know. And that was relatively mild as far as like being molested or sexual abuse goes. He exposed himself to me. I exposed myself to him. He touched me. I touched him, kind of thing. Very mild, relatively speaking. I reported him. I told my grandparents about him, about that happening. My grandparents addressed the family. I told my mom, and in most situations, what happens is they deny it. They say my kid wouldn't do that. You know, they deny everything. And so I was still sent back to that house to be babysat by those people. I don't remember the abuse or like the molestation, whatever you want to call that. I don't remember that continuing, but it did happen a few times. And so life goes on. During these years, I'm going home. My mom would frequently talk about a lot of like violence and aggression. So she had a bunch of different boyfriends all the time. We would come home and the boyfriend would be there or not be there. And she would talk to her friends about how she got into a fight, or she would talk to us about how she got into a fight with him, how he would throw punches at her and he was missing, and she threw a glass at him. There's holes in the walls. And so as kids, we're going home and we're seeing all this craziness going on. And there was no consistency. There was just like violence and toxic like relationships and perception of reality or life. So we had this twisted reality at home. My mom was always a smoker and a drinker. So she smoked cigarettes, but she also smoked weed and drank a lot. I don't know that I would call her an alcoholic in the early years, but she drank a lot. We had people over at our house a lot. They were always drinking together. They were always smoking together. And this is like 20 years ago when smoking weed was like truly criminal, you know? So it was a big deal. And during these times, my mom would always tell us like what happens in our house stays in our house. She would always hammer that in our heads. Like when you go to school, you don't talk about what happens in the home. Anybody asks you questions, you don't tell them what happens in here. Like this, none of their damn business, you know? And around probably 8 or 9 years old, life was starting to get more and more out of hand. We were constantly switching schools. So I don't think I ever finished a school year at the same school from start to finish until I was probably 12 or 13 years old. Every year, 2-3 times we'd be in different schools. And so the schools began to interview us. Child Protective Services would come in and interview us, and we would just tell them it's none of your business. It's none of your business, you know. And they knew something was going on. They knew something was wrong. And probably about 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere around there, my mom one day, she's like, hey, do you want to go meet your father? Do you want to go see your father? Is what she had asked me. To me, this is basically meeting him because I like I said, I have no memories of him. And I remember that day of like kind of trying to figure out like what do you mean go see my father, like see my dad, where's he at, you know? And he was in jail. And I knew he was in jail. My mom would always talk about him like negatively, like he doesn't pay the bills and he's a throwaway, he's a deadbeat. She would always talk about these things. And there's a term for that where parents talk bad about the other parent to the children, and how it can really twist your mind up a little bit as a kid. But anyways, she's like, hey, we're gonna go see him. He's in jail. And so I remember walking in the jail, and there's these cubicles. They're all lined up. There's plexiglass, you know, in the cubicles. There's a black phone on each side. And you walk in, you sit down, and then all the inmates come in. And I remember my dad, as soon as I saw him, I knew who he was. I'm not really sure how. Maybe it was him the way he looked at us. You know, I don't know. But he's tall. He's like 6'2", maybe 6'1", 6'2". He walks in. He's got pain and big block graffiti letters across his throat. He's got Aussie across his knuckles, a bunch of other prison tats on his arms. His fingers are all like twisted and bent, and his knuckles are all jacked up. He has a skull tattooed on the back of his head. And you can just kind of tell, like, this dude's been through some shit, or he looks like an inmate, you know? And he sat down, he picked up the phone, and I grabbed my phone, and I couldn't talk. I just fell apart. Start crying. I cried for like 20 minutes straight. I mean, I just literally couldn't say anything. And so he talked to my sisters and to my mom, and I sat there and cried. I felt horrible. You know, I didn't have a father, and this is my first memory of my father. Like, if I think about the earliest memories that I have, that's the first one that pops in my head is meeting him in jail or prison, wherever that was. And it sucks because even in my adulthood, you hear people talking about their memories with their father, and oh, my dad would play ball with me or eat breakfast with me or games or this or that, and I never had that. Throughout my childhood, I never had a man like pick me up and hold me, and love me and kiss me and tell me he loves me and hug me. And I've got a son now who, man, every chance I get, I pick his little ass up and I sniff him on his little freaking head and I give him a hug and a kiss and I just tell him I love him to death, And so when I think about my childhood in that regard, it does hurt because there's a lot of cool memories that people have and I just never got. So during that time, my mom, she started to become more aggressive around the house. She'd always been a disciplinarian mother, always whooped us, but things were like escalating pretty quickly. She started to become more physically abusive, verbally, just violent, just like yelling and screaming. And she began like close hand punching me and my sisters, a lot of like grabbing of hair, slamming heads against walls, yelling and screaming. We were still bouncing around a lot. And we spent time with an aunt and an uncle several times. We'd live with them for a month or two and then we'd move away. But I bring them up because we lived with this aunt and an uncle and they were like very strange. They were like sexual deviants, I guess you could say. And what's even crazier, or maybe not so crazy, is they were like heavily involved in the church. And we would go to church with them every Sunday. But my aunt, I can remember, she would come downstairs in the mornings and she would be completely naked and she would like kind of parade around the house almost in a way of like, look at me. Like she was just very clear. She would come and just walk around completely naked. And I'm 7, 8 years old, So it's kind of strange seeing those kind of things as a kid. They never did anything with me, but those behaviors were just weird, and we left their house and we're living by ourselves and my mom was dating this guy. She'd been dating him for longer than she normally dated guys. And he was living with us. And around 9 or 10 years old, that's really when things really, really started to pick up with my mom. I remember coming home one day, walking up the stairs, and I look into my living room, and my mom's in there. There's like 8 or 9 guys, and my older sister at least was in there. I don't think my younger sister was in there, but my older sister certainly was. And they're all sitting around the living room, maybe 10 people total, and they're passing a blunt around. And my older sister, who wouldn't have been older than 11, is smoking a blunt with all these adults in the living room. And I remember like seeing that and thinking to myself, like, I'll never be that person. I will never, like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I'm going to grow up and do something special. Like, this isn't going to be it, And I remember sitting in my room and just kind of having those thoughts. Around that same time, there was another day where sitting on my bed playing video games. My older sister had come in. She had just gotten into a fight with my younger sister. And so I'm kind of playing the video game. I'm looking at the TV. On my bed, there's a wall. I got my back against the wall. There's a wall to my left where my sister's sitting. She's got her back against the wall there. And my door's off to my left as well. And as my sister's kind of talking to me about this fight that she had just gotten into with my younger sister, my mom, like, just out of nowhere, kicks the door open, turns and looks at my sister, like closed hand, hammer fist style, turns, like punches her in the mouth. And she punches her 4 or 5 times, just repeatedly. And I'm watching my sister's head bounce off the wall. I mean, just very violent. And I remember jumping on the other side of my bed, 10 years old. I'm like crouched behind the mattress and I'm just hysterical. I'm a very emotional kid anyways, but at this moment, I think this was the first time that I had seen my mom really lay hands on one of us that aggressively. And so I'm behind the bed. I'm just crying and screaming. And my mom looks at me verbatim and says, "Stop being a fucking bitch before I give you something to cry about." And, I shut up. I shut up and, whatever. I can't remember what happens after that. My mom walks out of the room. Never apologizes, never comes and talks to us, never says anything about it. It is what it is. A couple weeks later, I was walking home from school with a couple cousins of mine, and boys being boys, we were running around just doing dumb shit, and we took forever getting home. You know, we got home an hour or two late because I typically rode the bus, and so walking home, anyways, we were going to be late. But I get home, and my mom, instead of being concerned or upset or like that we might have been missing or something we got lost, whatever, she's just mad as hell. She's, you know, kind of like, where you at? Where have you been? And she's just pissed off. And so she tells me, go upstairs. You know, I'm going to whoop your ass. I go upstairs and I'm not really thinking much of it. I think this is going to be like a pretty typical, get a couple cracks in the butt and like keep it moving. And I remember bending over her bed, grabbing the blankets and just kind of, here it is, like it's not a big deal. And I remember the first time she hits me with this paddle, she had this 2x6. It had a handle carved into it, had a bunch of holes drilled into it, and it was designed literally just for whooping kids. And which really wasn't that big of a deal, but the first time she hit me, I remember like thinking to myself, like, something's wrong. Like, this is not good. She had hit me so hard that I bounced off the bed and fell to my knees. And then she just kept swinging. Since I'd fallen to my knees, she hit me across the back about 4 or 5 times with this board. I fell to the floor. I'm laying on my stomach. I'm screaming and crying. Once again, instead of like, I love you, I'm sorry, this is why I did this, or, you know, this is a lesson that you need to learn. Instead of all of that, it was, get the fuck out of here, go to your fucking room. And so I crawled to my bedroom and I'm laying there crying for hours. I remember crying for hours. And I don't think I was crying so much because I was like physically hurting, but I didn't have a father. And my mother, the person who's supposed to love me and protect me, is just beating the shit out of me, right? And you just feel hurt, man. It just, that like sucks when your parents do that to you and then there's just no love. It hurts. It's very hard growing up without that. And so I laid there and I cried. Around that time is probably when I started to become more suicidal. So I can remember sitting outside my bedroom window, 10 years old, and thinking about, if I fall out of this window just right, I will die. I'll break my neck and die. I thought about cutting myself, thought about drowning myself, shooting myself. Like, I thought about all these different mechanisms of suicide, and I couldn't execute on any of them, mostly because I was scared of the pain. I was just terrified of feeling pain. If I could execute one of those things without feeling pain, maybe I would have done it. I don't know. I never attempted it, but it started to become this like obsession every single day. I was just like, just wanting to kill myself, and it's pretty tough. I'm going to school every day. I'm getting bullied at home. I'm getting bullied. And even though I was a really good student, I was really smart, straight A student, I was doing all the right things at school. It was just a struggle being bullied and then coming home and not having anything. And so this is all like a recipe for disaster for children, especially young boys. They usually go, you know, they usually get into gangs. They usually get into some sort of violence. They usually get into fighting and all this shit. And I was doing all of those things as well. I was never gang related, but I did a lot of dumb shit. I got into a lot of fights, tried to break into cars, tried to break into houses, you know, ran around with my friends at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, throwing rocks at cars, stealing from stores, like just all kinds of stupid things that kids do when they have nowhere else to go or they want to get out of the house. And I ended up meeting this kid down the street. He lives like around the corner from me. His name was Jacob. And Jacob, he's about 15 years old. I was 10. And Jacob quickly becomes my best friend. And I always found myself hanging out with older kids or bigger kids just because they could protect me. You know, I got bullied a lot, and so they could protect me. And Jacob knew that my life at home was jacked up. And so he kind of takes that role as like an older brother to me. And he starts hanging out with me, and I'm hanging out with him and all of his friends. And he was cool. He'd let me come over, spend the night with him whenever I wanted, play video games, hang out. And after a few months of hanging out with him, I was over at his house one day, and I'm coming down the stairs, and this man's at the front door. He walks in. This big guy. He's like 6'6", 6'5". He's 380 pounds. He's Hispanic, but he's very pale. He's got long, black, slick back hair. He has the Dahmer, like, aviator-style glasses, you know. He walks in, and he's just big-ass guy. And he doesn't look sloppy. Like, he looks like he could throw a hard punch. That's kind of how I would, he just looked capable. And he asked me what my name is. I said, my name is Seth. He's like, well, my name is Mondo. Nice to meet you. He's like, yeah, do you like video games? I love video games. Do you like pizza? Yeah, I love pizza. Do you like football? Yeah, I love football. So he's like, well, why don't you come up to my house this weekend with me and Jacob? We'll hang out, we'll play video games and eat pizza and watch some football. And so I said, okay, let me go home and ask my mom. So I go home and ask my mom, hey, Mom, I want to go to this guy's house with Jacob. And this guy is clearly an older man. He was probably about 31 or 32 at that time. And my mom says, as long as I'm with Jacob, I'm good to go. So I go up to this guy's name was Mondo. So I go get in his car. He takes us to a fast food restaurant. We get whatever we want on the menu, which was rare for me. Like, I don't think I ever ordered anything off the dollar menu. We got whatever we wanted, sides, large drink. Like, it was cool, And I'm in the back of this guy's car. And we're going up to Bluffton, Ohio, which is like 30 minutes away. And so I've got my new best friend, Jacob, in the passenger seat in front of me. Mondo's driving. He's like, suddenly like my new best friend as well, We're listening to like AC/DC, Metallica, and we're headed up to Bluffton, Ohio. And I just felt really like happy at that moment because it was cool. It was just a cool experience. And I was excited for like what was to come, And we get up there. We get to it. He lived in a studio apartment. So we walk in, it's just one big room. I look to my right, there's an entertainment center, a couple TVs, a couple game systems. There's 2 computers in the back right corner. His bed was in the back left corner, and it was blocked off by some like black sheets, curtains that were hanging from the ceiling. It was very, very, very dark in there. There was like no lights on. All the windows were blacked out. They had like plastic trash bags covering up the windows. It was very dark and it was cold. The air conditioning was like full blast. It was really cold in there. And it was dirty as well. There was trash all over the place. But my initial thoughts were, this is awesome because we have multiple game systems, so we don't have to take turns, multiple TVs, So we sit down, we start playing games. And later on that night, he orders some pizza. We eat a bunch of pizza. We have pop, energy drinks, coffee, video games, and I didn't go to sleep. I just played games all night long. Sunday rolls around. And he takes us home and he asked me, he says, when do you want to come back? And I said, dude, I'll be back next weekend. Like, I get out of school Friday at this time, like, come pick me up, And so from that point forward, I start going up to Mondo's house every single weekend. And at some point it became, I don't know if my mother stopped asking or I just didn't tell her, but at some point I was going up to his house without Jacob. And sometimes Jacob would be there and sometimes he wouldn't. On the times that Jacob would be there, I would notice that Jacob would go back and sleep in the guy's bed with him. But I didn't think anything of it. I just was like, as a kid, 2 boys, you'll sleep in the same bed sometimes. You have a sleepover, you might share a bed, right? Or you might share the couch. I don't know. So I was used to that. And so to me, I didn't think anything of it. And keep going back to Mondo's house. And after about 2 or 3 months, I start telling Mondo about my home life, my home situation. And during this time, about 2 or 3 months into meeting Mondo, my mom had a new boyfriend. This guy's name was Jamie. He's a light-skinned guy. He was missing a couple teeth and he had cornrows and he was like fit. Like he had like an athletic build on him, He kind of looked a little muscular. And I talk about him in my book saying that he has a crooked smile, because he was very charismatic. He was part of the church. He was part of one of the local churches, and he was the pastor or whatever. He got up on the stage and he gave the sermon. He talked to everybody in the church, and so he's very charismatic. Everybody loved him, and my mom fell head over heels for him quickly. But I knew there was something, like, this dude was jacked up. I didn't know what it was, but I could just tell there's something wrong with him. And sure enough, he ended up getting my mother addicted to crack and cocaine. And so once my mom became addicted to crack and coke, things at home got really, really out of hand. Every day, 5, 10, 15 people would start coming in the house. They'd walk in the front door, walk straight to the back, and start getting high in the bathroom. I can remember being 10 years old and seeing people passed out on my couch that were completely high at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. I had a pregnant aunt at the time who was using and was at my house and passed out, shaking. It's sad because that kid that she was pregnant with is now one of those kids on Facebook, like posting the guns and the drugs and the money, you know. I remember that from like 20 years ago, you know, seeing that, which is just crazy. But anyways, during that time, we lived in a house. We ended up moving to a house that we didn't have utilities on initially, which that was common. There was a lot of times where we didn't have hot water or power, and you know, those things. I mean, that sucks, but it's really not that bad. I think a lot of people would probably hate that, but it's not that bad. But we moved into this house. We didn't have utilities, and it was the dead of winter in Ohio. And I remember going upstairs to see my new bedroom and walk in the bedroom. There's cracked hardwoods all the way across the floor. All the hardwood floor is cracked and split and buckled, and they do that when they're exposed to weather. So I look up in my bedroom, and the entire corner of my ceiling is missing, like a 3 foot by 4 foot section, completely missing. So you could see straight into the attic above. So the hardwoods were damaged because it had been raining and snowing like directly into my room, you know. And I'm standing there in the room. It's cold as hell. You can see your breath. I have a thin little mattress on the floor, 3-4 inch mattress, thin blanket, just all torn up. And that was my bedroom for the foreseeable future. And that was probably the first time in my childhood that I really began to like question my mother when we moved into that house and she got that boyfriend and the drugs and all that. Everything prior to that, like she was my mom, and it didn't really matter. Like I loved her, you know. I didn't think that anything was wrong. But that moment, I can remember being in that room and just thinking to myself, like, yeah, this is not okay. And my mom slept in the living room downstairs. She had her own bed in a nice warm living room while I was up in this room, like freezing every night. I went to bed every night, wake up, soaked in my own pee, get up, change, go to school. And that was kind of my day-to-day life, Monday through Friday. And then Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday, I was hanging out with Mondo. So like I said, about 2-3 months into knowing him, I start telling Mondo about all these things at home. You know, I'm telling him like, hey, you know, my mom, I think she's addicted. She's abusive. She's got this boyfriend. You know, I get bullied at school. Like I have all these problems. And Mondo, whether it was true or not, tells me the same things about his own childhood. He's like, yeah, well, you know, I grew up with a single mother. I had a couple sisters. My mom was abusive and violent. She hated me. He was also bullied in school. He was really smart, but he was also bullied. And so Mondo quickly became the only person that I could talk to who related to me, you know. And probably 3 months into knowing him, I'm up at his house one weekend with Jacob, and Jacob had left on a Sunday to go get some tacos. And I remember being on his couch next to him, next to Mondo, and I was cold. And so I told him, I said, you know, I'm kind of cold. I asked him if he had another blanket. And he says, well, why don't you come and sit in my lap? And because he had a blanket. And so I get up on his lap, and I'm sitting on his left leg. He's a very big guy. I'm sitting on his left leg. He puts his left hand on my hip. And he says, we're watching football, and I'm underneath the blanket with him. And truth be told, it was comforting. It was comfortable. It was warm. I'd never been held by a man before. And as a young boy, you long for like your appreciation and love from a father or a male figure. It's just something that's, I mean, men, you need that love and affection and validation from another man when you're growing up. It's very important. And I'd never had that. And so Mondo was the first person to ever give that to me. And I remember laying on his chest, and I was warm. I was comfortable. And he puts his left hand on my left hip, and his hand falls off and hits my butt. And he apologizes to me. He says, I'm sorry. And I said, it's okay. It's not a big deal. And I figured, like, if me and you bump each other in the hallway, like, not a big deal. Like, you know, whatever. It was an accident. And so he puts his hand back on my butt, and he says, so this is okay. And as soon as he does that, I immediately already know what's going on. I'm like, okay, you know, this is what I'm in for right now. And it almost feels like you're at the top of a roller coaster, and you hear like the first couple or the last few clicks, and you're about to go down the hill, you know, but you're already strapped in. And so you just feel like you can't move. There's no escape at this point. And I did what most people do in these situations, is I froze up. I didn't say anything. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't move his hand. I didn't tell him I was uncomfortable. I just let it happen. And so he held his hand on my butt. A few minutes go by, and we hear the gravel turning outside. Jacob pulls back into the house with the food. And so he moves his hand away, and I'm still sitting on his lap. Jacob comes in, we eat tacos, we go home. And when I got home, once again, I do the same thing that most people do in these situations. They gaslight themselves. You know, I say to myself, like, it's not weird. Like, that wasn't a weird thing. It wasn't, you know, he didn't mean it in any kind of way, whatever, right? You start to lie to yourself, defend the situation. You're trying to justify what he had done, you know, because for whatever reason, like, that's just what people do when they're in those situations. And so that's what I began to do. Let's see, shortly after that, every weekend I would go back to his house. It was a constant like progression of abuse from him. So it was like, it's a very slow burn. I say, you know, it's nothing that happens quickly. There's no like sudden crazy acts of abuse. It's all very slow, technical, like strategic, for lack of a better word. And like I said, it's a very slow burn. So it's nothing that hurts so bad that it makes you want to run away or get away from the situation. It's just very, very slow and methodical. And he would eventually like go from putting his hand on my butt to putting his thumb in my waistband to his finger to two fingers, you know, to where his whole hand was in my shorts on my bare skin. And I can remember to this day, like, I remember how his hands feel. He had these like big hands. His palms are all calloused. He had long nails. And I remember like the rough sensation of his skin on, you know, my skin. I know what his nails feel like to this day. I can remember what he smelled like. He always smelled like Old Spice, like body wash. And he just slowly was like making progress, I guess you could say. And for the first, you know, 2.5 years that I knew the guy, it slowly went from, like I said, just touching me with his hands to eventually trying to use his hands on me, his fingers on me. I can remember all of the details, but things that are like really kind of, for some odd reason, like haunting, is like hearing the sound of like a Vaseline jar popping open. You know, I remember what the Vaseline looked like. I remember the deep scoops that you could see in there from where he had stuck his fingers in there. And there was a time where he was trying to use his fingers on me, and I told him, like, no, stop, ow, that hurts. And he asked me, he said, well, what do you mean? Like, what's wrong? And I said, your nails hurt really bad. And I'm like 10 years old, man. This guy's trying to basically rape me with his fingers. And I told him that the nails hurt. And so, like, the following weekend, I come back to his house and his nails are gone. And so, in order to satisfy his like twisted, sick desires, I mean, he was literally going as far as just getting rid of his nails so that he could use his fingers on me. And so all of this kind of is like continuing, and it's going on every weekend. And I didn't really have anywhere to go. So like Monday through Friday, like I said, I was living at this hell with my mom. And on the weekends, I didn't have anywhere to go. So I would just go to his house. And at some point, it became so routine for me to go to his home that if I didn't go to his house, like something was up, something was wrong. And not only that, but in all the commonalities that we had shared with one another, he began to express these like deep emotions and feelings for me. So he would tell me I was the only thing that mattered. If it wasn't for me, he was going to kill himself, and that he loved me, and that I was so important and special to him. And so at 10, 11, 12 years old, like, as adults have trouble dealing with those emotions, you know, like just a man and a woman. If a man tells a woman that if she leaves him, he's going to kill himself, a woman can't even leave that relationship most of the time, a lot of the times. And so as a child, like, I was defenseless. I had to keep going back to his house. You're scared, you know, the guy's very capable. So if I didn't go back, or if I told on him, like, what was going to happen, you know, like, was he going to kill me? Were people going to believe me? You're just terrified of all of these things. And so it's going on for a few years, or a couple of years at this point. And one weekend he drops me off back at home, and I noticed my sisters were at my neighbor's house, which is really rare and strange. So I went over there and I was kind of seeing what was going on, and they're watching a TV show called Intervention. And Intervention back in the day, if you're unfamiliar, basically there's like a family member that gets addicted or whatever, and the family sets up a surprise intervention for them to say like, hey, we're going to help you get out of this addiction, right? And at the end of every episode, they put their contact information out there. And so me and my sisters looking at each other and we're like, hey, like, let's see if we can get mom. Let's see if we can contact these people, see if they'll come and help out mom. And no shit, we walk outside that day and there's a fire in my front yard. My mom's boyfriend comes out the front porch or front door. He's standing on the front porch. He's wearing a white tank top. He's got blood all over his body. My mom comes out. She's running around yelling and screaming. The police show up, and apparently what had happened is they were in the bathroom and she had stabbed him over some drugs. And so cop throws my mom in the back of the car. I'm at the police car, like screaming and crying and begging for my mother. You know, I'm like terrified. She's about to be taken away from me, and we don't have anywhere to go. Like, we don't have anybody to protect us or take care of us. She's in the back of the car. She's telling me, you know, I love you. I'll be back. It's going to be okay. And I'm just like kind of looking at her in the back of this car, and it's hot out. I'm sweating, but at the same time, I'm like freezing cold. And I just felt like I was like melting into the ground. I felt like I was just, I felt like I was dying. If you ask me what death feels like, I would say it's probably close to how I felt that day. And the cop comes and takes her away. We go inside, and there's another cop, and a bunch of family members show up, and my dad is there, like out of nowhere. I hadn't seen him in I don't know how long. My dad's suddenly there, and the cop is kind of like, hey, you know, what are we going to do with the kids? And so we all end up going to my dad's house. Due to the circumstances of what had just happened with my mother being taken away and all of the sexual abuse that I was already experiencing, you know, you can imagine I was struggling hard. And so we go to this new school, and I'm trying to just survive, basically. I'm just trying to make it to the next meal, you know, make it to the next freaking day, to the next sunrise, whatever. I'm just trying to survive. And teachers are kind of giving me shit, and they're all my case because I was a city kid out in the country school, and just things were just not going well. Ended up getting into a bunch of trouble at school, and I put my hands on the principal, and they basically told me, you know, if you do anything else, you're going to go to juvie. And so I told my dad, I was like, I got to go back to the city, like where I'm from, like where people know me, you know. So I go back to the city, and at 12 years old, I start couch surfing, essentially. I'm living with family, cousins, and I lived with them for like a month, and like, hey, we're having a new baby. You got to go. You know, we can't take care of you. We're not going to have enough money. And so I leave their house, and I go live with some other people, and I'm bouncing around. And I'd lived with like 4 or 5 different households. And the last one that I lived in, I ended up getting a phone call one day, and I pick up the phone, and it's my mom. And I hadn't seen my mom in like 4 or 5, 6 months, something like that. I had no idea where she was. I didn't know if she was in jail. I didn't know if she was out. I didn't know what was going on. But she called me, and she said, hey, like, I'm going to come and get you. I'm going to come and pick you up where you at. And I told her, I said, Mom, I said, I don't want to live with you anymore. Like, I don't want to go back and live with you. And that was really hard to do at 12 years old, you know, but especially because as soon as I said that, and once again, instead of like apologizing or it's okay or I'm doing better now, she tells me, you know, fuck you. Like, you're my son. I'm going to come and get you. You're my responsibility. You're coming to live with me. And after leaving her house and after everything she had already put us through, that was the last thing I wanted to do. You know, I was terrified. And so the people I lived with, they had offered to adopt me, but we had no relation. So there was little to no chance they were going to be able to adopt me. And somehow or another, my grandparents get contacted. My grandparents come and pick me up. And my grandparents had been trying to adopt us and like get us out of our mom's house my entire life. They just never could because of the systems and all that. It's really hard to take kids away from a home, surprisingly enough. So anyways, my grandparents come and pick me up. I go to their house, and my sisters are there. So once again, I had another moment of like, this is it, man. Like, we finally made it. Like, we're all together. We're at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and, you know, my grandparents, they were well off. My grandpa retired from Ford. My grandma ran her own business. So we lived in this big house, nice cars, nice clothes, pool out back, finished basement. Like, I was like, dude, this is it. Like, we finally freaking made it, you know? And during that time, I'm still talking to Mondo. So I talked to him several times a week on the phone, and I was trying to like break ties with him. So it had been like 2 or 3 weeks since I had gone to his house, which was really rare because, like I said, I was going to his house every weekend. And I remember having a phone call with him one day, and he asked me, he said, when are you going to come back up? Like it's been a while. And I said, well, I don't need you anymore. Like I've got a family now, and I'm okay now. Like I don't need to come and see you every single weekend. And when I had said that, he proceeded to go into this very manipulative conversation of, what do you mean you don't need me? Once again, you're the only thing that matters. And if you're not here, like I'm going to kill myself. And like, what am I? So you're just using me this whole time, kind of thing. And I don't know what to say. And I'm like, kind of like, I'm just trying to freaking be a kid, man. Like, leave me alone, I don't say any of that. I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll come back to your house. I was just terrified and confused and scared. And I felt horrible. Like he made me feel bad for him, that as if I was doing something wrong, And so I tell my grandparents, like, hey, I've got this friend Mondo that I want to go and see. And my grandparents initially are like, fuck no, like, we're not doing this. Like, that's weird. He's a grown man. You're a kid. We're not doing this. And so I tell him, like, no, he's not weird. And then I defend him, and I come up with all these reasons of why I want to go hang out with him. And so they want to meet him. And so Mondo comes to my house, and he walks at the front door. He makes him laugh. He makes him smile, and he's back in the saddle, basically. So what people fail to realize with predators or abusive people or manipulative people is that they're not only manipulating or abusing one person, they're doing it to their entire like ecosystem or whatever you want to call it. Like everybody who's involved with you is manipulated, right? Everybody who's involved with that guy at work, at home, around his family, like he is manipulating everybody in his circle to do what he wants to do, right? Whether it's whatever you want to do. And so that's what he was doing. At this point, there was it's like an interesting kind of shift in the relationship, I suppose, because the first 2 or 3 years that I knew him, I was going to his house all the time, and I was with his family all the time. So I knew his mom, I knew his sisters, I knew his nieces and nephews. I would go to his like 4th of July's, Memorial Days, Thanksgiving, Christmas. I would go to all the holidays with him, and I was this kid showing up at his family's holidays, and nobody ever said anything about it, Like nobody made any weird comments of like, hey, like this is not strange. In fact, the first time I met his mother, I had long hair. I had long brown hair down to my shoulders. The first time I met his mom, she told me that I was too pretty to be a boy. And so when he would sexually abuse me, he would often make that reference of like, you're too pretty, you're too pretty. And he would talk about my body and all these different like he'd make all these weird comments, So when I moved in with my grandparents, I still knew his family, but he was now at this point, he was coming to my house and he was coming to my birthday party, my Christmases, my Thanksgiving. So now I was like this kid with this adult friend, and still nobody was ever putting their foot down. I'm sure people had questions, but nobody was ever like, we're not doing this shit,
I just want to interject here really quickly, and then I want you to continue, but like,
Sure.
what's this guy's objective? Have you thought about that? I mean, obviously I know we're going to get to post things like what happened after, but I guess just like what is he trying to get out of you, out of life, out of other children? What does he want?
So it's kind of interesting, and I don't know, to answer your question, right? At the time, he was telling me like, I can't wait for you to be 18, so we don't have to hide this anymore. So it's not illegal. That's kind of some of the things he would tell me. But with pedophiles in general, there's different terms for them, and depending on who they're attracted to. But the common term is pedophile. And so for pedophiles, a lot of times they're very immature people. And he was, in the sense that he loved video games. He loved, pizza and pop. And he was basically like a 12-year-old. He was living like a 12-year-old. Like if you asked a 12-year-old how they would live, that's how they would live, And so this may have been his case, I don't know. But in some situations, what you'll find is these people like live like children. And when they live like that, it attracts children. And then due to that attraction, they end up becoming sexually attracted to these children. That is a way that it does happen. So sometimes they're not inherently trying to abuse this child, but they end up hanging out with the child so much that they build this relationship with them that eventually becomes loving or sexual, or, you know, however you want to look at it, right? So it's a very interesting psychological like thing, but that comes from immaturity, right? So adults who act like children, that's like a red flag, basically. You see an adult who just is fixated with video games and living like a child with no responsibilities, no career, no aspirations, and they want to hang out with kids, or kids will be, maybe they don't even want to hang out with kids, but kids are just attracted to them because of their lifestyle, right?
Maybe so like a Michael Jackson. Does that kind of fit the description of what you're talking about a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know if I would compare him to Michael Jackson. Maybe not. I'm not
just
sure.
saying because he like built like a amusement park on his
right.
property.
Okay. Yeah. So in that regard, like just wanting to be like free and happy and like, it's just very odd. You know, it's a very odd way to live as an adult,
right.
and it'll attract kids. And another way this happens a lot of times too with like drugs, where you start selling drugs, and you're selling drugs to a bunch of 16-year-olds. And then maybe a girl comes by, and now you're selling drugs to this girl all the time, or this girl's with these guys all the time, and maybe they don't have a way to pay. And so now then you end up getting into that like trafficking situation, right? And so it's a very similar slippery path that, like I said, you don't have to be attracted to children. It's just when you spend that much time in that environment, in that setting with them, that it kind of escalates.
Yeah.
And that's not an absolute. It's not always how it happens. And that doesn't mean if you hang out with kids, that's who you are. But that's, you know, I don't know what his objective was, but he would tell me that he couldn't wait till I was 18. Usually what happens, or maybe not usually, but a lot of times kids will kind of phase out. So once they become 16, 17 years old, they basically look like men. The pedophile is no longer attracted to them because they're attracted to these like prepubescent or whatever the next adolescent, maybe, I don't know what the progress there is, but they're either attracted to like this prepubescent child or fresh out, or even younger. Sometimes they're just attracted to just only a certain age group of like very young kids. And there's like a lot of complexity with all of that. So most of the time with these guys that are only attracted to like prepubescent children, once the child like ages out 15, 16 years old or so, 17 years old, they leave them alone. They go to the next child. They may use that kid to recruit another kid, which you could say that was possibly the case, being that I was introduced to him through Jacob, who was my older friend. And yeah, so it's very complicated. It's very confusing. And I don't know what his end state was. You know, I just know what he was doing, you know.
During this time, were you still trying to like talk to girls?
So at 12, 10, 11, 12 years old, I had like girls at school that I would talk to and like I would crush on and flirt with. But especially when I got to my grandparents' house, like you get a little bit older where like you might actually start hanging out with friends at football games and things like that. I never really pursued it because it wasn't going to go anywhere. Like I couldn't hang out with him. I was busy every weekend, I was gone every weekend. Like kids would ask me, what are you doing on the weekends? Or what do you, sometimes they'd invite me to go do things or whatever, but I was busy. Like I was at Mondo's house, and so I never pursued it for that reason. Yeah. Interesting point though, is at 12, 13 years old, like I remember being on the bus and like hearing boys talk about like kissing girls and this and that, or talking to some girl over the weekend or whatever, and hanging out with some girl, and people would ask me what I was doing on my weekends, and I would like sometimes brag about having a friend who was an adult, but I obviously could never talk about my weekends, and so that was kind of like a weird social anxiety that I had, where I was trying to put on this image of like I'm this normal kid, but in reality I felt like I was just disgusting and just a horrible person and just less than everybody else because of everything that was happening to me and everything that I had come from. And because when I moved in with my grandparents, we all lived out in the country, and so we went to a nicer school. I went from a predominantly black, like inner city school to an all white school, like 2 black kids in the whole city and the whole school, which were also adopted. They were in foster care. I grew up with them in the city, and the cultural differences are just clear and obvious. You grew up in the city, it's just a different vibe. It's just a different life. And then you go out to the country where there's nothing but white kids who, their parents and their parents' parents all grew up in these towns. And so you just, as you can imagine, there's a lot of racism. And even when I went to the school, I was the kid that they all called the racist terms. So like the 2 black kids that were there, they were bullied as well. I wouldn't say bullied, but the kids there were racist towards them as well, just not in their face, but they were openly like racist towards me, which was very strange. Because it was just a weird dynamic, So anyways, those kids, oddly enough, became my best friends. I wrote about them in the book too, but the 2 black kids that I went to school with. Anyways, so yeah, Mondo came and met my grandparents, and then I kept hanging out with him. And my grandparents asked to adopt me. I say yes. So then I stay with my grandparents. My sisters, unfortunately, they wanted to go back and live with my mom due to the manipulation. My mom was calling them every week and talking to them. And my mom convinced them to go back and live with her. So I stayed with my grandparents by myself. And I remember around my 13th birthday, like coming home, getting off the bus, and there was a surprise birthday party, and everybody's there. Mondo's there. A couple of my friends were there. And it was just strange, that he was like around my family so much. But around that time too, 13 years old, I remember being at his house one weekend, and he would always do this thing where like he would punch the wall behind him when he was laying in bed, So we would get up there, and he would almost immediately go lay down in bed, because when he lay down in bed, he would always say he was depressed or tired or whatever, didn't want to be alive. And so he'd go back there and lay down in his bed. And because of my like guilty or my guilty nature, or like this feeling to make him happy, because you feel bad, somebody says they're going to kill themselves, man, you feel bad. And so he would say that, and he'd go back there and lay down. And that was his way of drawing me back to the bed, to get to spend time with him instead of playing video games. And he would punch the wall behind him, and I would go back there. On the first time he did that, I would go back and check on him, and I'm kind of like, hey, what's going on? And when I went back in there and checked on him, he would just say he's angry or whatever. And so I stayed back there, and I was just kind of trying to make him happy. He pulled me into the bed, and he proceeded to, molest me in some form or fashion. And I remember being up there one weekend shortly after turning 13. He's doing the same thing. He's punching the wall. And when he would do that, like my stomach would like turn, I'm out there playing video games, and I would hear the wall start getting punched. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is it. Like, this is basically the dinner bell ringing, this is like my call to hell, It's like opening up the basement door, and you're just scared because it's dark down there and there's no lights, and you don't know what's in there, But I did. I knew what was down there, And so he's punching the wall, and I every time he did it, every time he would punch the wall, it was just, the longer I resisted it, the more I resisted it, the more it just pulled on my like heart and soul. And it just feels almost like somebody has their hand inside your head, and they're just like squeezing your brain, because you don't want to do it, but it's paralyzing, and you do it. So I go back there and I check on him, and he was sitting up at this time, which was odd. He was always laying down, and he kind of pulls me into him, and then he stands up and he pushes me into the bed a little bit, and he's kind of like pushing me from behind. He's pushing, my knees hit the mattress. I remember my knees hit the mattress, and I just go to my knees. I'm on my hands and knees on his bed, and I know what's happening at this point. And he had attempted this multiple times over the last few years. but I'd always resisted it, and I always was like, no, like I can't do this. I'm not doing this. I don't want to do this. Which I said that to everything, but like I said, at some point it becomes easier to feed the beast than it does to resist it. So I sat there on my hands and knees. I hear the little Vaseline jar pop open, and 13 years old, and he proceeds to rape me. It's going on, and I'm just frozen. I'm terrified. I'm freezing cold. He finishes. He wipes me up with a towel. And I go to the bathroom. And I was sitting on his toilet, and I'm just crying. I just have my head in my hands, and I'm just crying my eyes out because I have no mother. I have no father. You know, I've been abused, and I've been sexually abused for years and molested, and now I've been raped. I don't have any friends. I'm just alone. Like, I'm all alone in the world. I'm sitting in this depressing bathroom just crying my eyes out. And at this point, now I'm even more terrified to report or to say anything or to tell him or whatever, because for me to report, not only would I be, I would be telling on him, but I would also be telling on myself, like telling people that I was, for lack of a better word, like complicit. Like I allowed these things to happen. I just basically allowed him to rape me, you know? And there's a lot of levels to that, but it's shameful and it's embarrassing. And I was so scared of people finding out, you know, of who I was or what had happened to me. I was scared I would have nightmares of going to the hospital and seeing an HIV test and seeing that it says positive, you know. I didn't want to see that. Like, so I was scared of that. I was scared of being tested and people thinking I was gay. I was scared of people making fun of me for being with this man and doing these things with this man. And so I just, at this point, like I refused to say anything. I was going to keep it a secret until I died, you know. And I get up, I take a shower, and I go back out and I put a smile on and I keep playing the game. And it goes on and on for, you know, a couple more years. A couple years later, I'm up at his house, and I was about a month away from being 16, and I had a younger friend that was with me that was there. And my younger friend was having a bad day. And so Mondo says to him, if you're having a bad day, I can take you back in the bed and blow you. He says it right in front of me. And we laughed it off. We'd all laugh it off in the room. But in my mind, like I knew what was happening. And what's so like striking about this moment was the audacity that he had to say that in front of me, because he would make those same comments about me in front of other adults. So we had like other adult friend groups that we'd hung out with over the last almost 6 years. Not his family, not my family, but just other adult friend groups that, you know, we watch football or play games with, whatever. And whenever it was time to leave their house or go back to Mondo's house, he would always make that comment of like, I've got to go back and fuck Seth tonight, or I'm going to go back so Seth can blow me tonight. He would say that to these other adults, and these other adults, we'd all just be in a room laughing it off, joking. It was funny. It was like haha moments. But every time he would do that, like my stomach would just turn, because I knew that's what was going to happen, you know. And Mondo was the funny guy. He was the lovable guy. He was a wolf in sheep clothing. He fit in, you know, wherever he went. And what he was doing in front of all those people was kind of a couple things. It's another manipulative tactic that predators use. Is he would tell these other adults right in front of me exactly what he was going to do to me. They would laugh, and then it's a way of saying, do you understand? Like, these people don't believe you, you know. I can do whatever I want. Like, they're not going to believe you because they're not saying anything now, right? So he'd make these comments, and he's also convincing the people that he's saying that to that he would never do something like that, you know, because like, why would you admit that? You would never admit that you're doing that to a kid, you know? So obviously he's joking, right? And that's the power and the manipulation, you know? So people a lot of times would ask me like, why do you keep going back? And it's like, man, why didn't you report? Why didn't the adults say something, you know? And it's that same reason. It's a bystander effect. You know, it's, you see somebody set on fire in front of you, like, are you going to save them? Maybe you do. Or maybe you just sit there and watch because you're so blown away. You're so in shock by what's happening that it doesn't even seem real. Like that's the bystander effect. And so that's what was happening to me. And so when he made that comment to my friend that night, you know, why don't I take you back into bed and blow you? To me, I was like, at 15 years old, I was about to be 16. I couldn't let it happen. Like, I was sick to my stomach. And so my friend goes back to the bed with him. He goes back there. I can't remember how long they were back there. They weren't back there very long, but that was the first time I'd ever seen any other kid go back there with him other than Jacob when we first started hanging out. So in my head, I knew it was about to start happening to my friend. I knew that he was about to start abusing him. And I'm playing a video game and I hit up Jacob on the video game. He was online. And so I said, hey man, I need to talk to you Sunday. This was a Friday night. I said, I need to talk to you Sunday. And Jacob responds back. All he says is, okay, got it. A few minutes later, Mondo comes out and the whole mood had kind of shifted that weekend. It kind of felt like he was pissed off, or it almost felt like he knew that I had messaged somebody on the video game, you know. I think he may have seen the screen when he first came out and maybe saw the chat box or so, I don't know, you know, but it felt like he knew that I had reached out to Jacob. And these people are so smart, they're so strategic that if he would have seen me message Jacob, he would have certainly known that I was going to say something, you know, or maybe I was in my own head, but it felt like I was going to get murdered that weekend. Truthfully, I was so scared that whole weekend. And then Saturday night rolls around. Unfortunately, he rapes me Saturday night. And, you know, this had happened multiple times over the last few years since I was 13. And that just happened to be one of those nights. And Sunday rolls around. He takes us home. He drops me off first. Then he goes and takes my friend home. And Jacob shows up at my house shortly after. And we're walking around. We had a pond out back, and we're laughing and joking. And then we get in my bedroom, and Jacob's sitting on my bed, and I'm pacing back and forth in my bedroom. I'm just walking back and forth. I can't tell Jacob what just happened, but I'm telling him. I'm saying, you know, there's been something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. Like, I don't want you to be mad. I don't want you to be upset with me. I'm just really scared, and you know, I don't know how to say this. And I'm pacing, and I'm just shaking. And I can't say the words. I cannot tell Jacob what happened. And Jacob breaks the silence and he says, Mondo touched you, didn't he? And when he says that, I fell apart, like just crying hysterically. I fall to the floor. I'm like punching the floor. I'm grabbing at this like hardwoods. I'm just the same feelings that I had when my mother was taken away from me. It was like that same feeling. I was hot, but cold and sweating, and I just felt like I was dying, like right there on my floor. 16 years of like pain and misery and hell was coming out of my body. And Jacob says to me again, he says, well, he did it to me too. And so I turn and look at him, and I'm just like blown away, you know, because Jacob he's in college at this point. He's drinking, he's hanging out with all the girls. He's my hero. You know, if you have an older brother or like your father or like this man that's in your life that's tough and untouchable, like that's who Jacob was to me. And so I couldn't believe it. Like, I was completely blown away that it had happened to him as well. And he says to me, what do you want to do? He said, I'll follow your lead. Do you want to report him, or do you want to keep it a secret? And I was like, no, we got to report him. You know, he's about to start abusing my younger friend. Like, we got to report him. And so Jacob's like, all right, let's go. So we go out in the living room, or we go out in the sunroom. My grandparents are out there. I go out there. I've got a flushed face. I've clearly been crying. And my grandma's kind of like concerned. She's, you know, what's going on? And I'm sitting on the couch, and I can't say it again. You know, I just can't say the words. I cannot speak it. And Jacob, once again, breaks the silence. He says, it's Mondo. That's all he says. It's Mondo. And I immediately can hear my grandma like across the room crying, you know. I can hear her like faint voice of, you know, my baby, and she's crying. And I like get up and I go and hug her. because I feel horrible. You know, I feel like it's my fault in that moment because I let this guy in my house. I defended him for so long, told my grandparents he wasn't, you know, weird or whatever, and I defended him and I let him in the house. And it sucks really bad because my grandma's not here anymore. She passed away in 2019, and I like this moment in particular is like the last. Yeah, it's a very powerful moment for me. It's a very personal moment with me and her, and she's not around to see what I'm doing anymore. You know, so it just sucks that she's not here and that we kind of experienced all that. But we call 911. They're like, "Yep, go down to the hospital. You know, we'll send an officer." So I get down to the hospital and I go to the nurse's room and I'm talking to a few nurses and they're kind of asking me all these questions. And one of the nurses asked me, she says, you know, "Seth, when was the last time you were at his house?" And I was like, "Well, I was there this weekend." And she said, "Do you have any clothes or do you have anything that you've worn to his house recently that hasn't been washed?" And I said, "Well, yes." I said, "He just raped me, you know, like 12 hours ago, like just a few hours ago. And I just left his house and I haven't changed my clothes and I haven't taken a shower." And she got down on her knees. She like put her hand on my leg and she's like, "You are incredible." And she asked me, you know, "Do you mind if we take your clothes off and test you?" And so I do all that. They do the whole like rape kit test thing. And then this officer comes to the hospital. He walks in and he's this big guy. I see his last name is Couples. And I'm like, "Hey, was your wife Mrs. Couples?" He says, yes, that's my wife. His wife was my teacher a few years prior, which is crazy because his wife would bring him into school on like Veterans Day, Memorial Days, because he served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I had already met the guy before. I already like kind of seen him before, you know. And so with his wife being one of my prior teachers and then kind of meeting him and kind of seeing him before, we had already built this like commonality, you know, and which is very important when you build some rapport with somebody, you're going to get a lot more out of them, you know. And so he takes me into this other room and he's like, "Seth, you know, I know this is going to be hard, but the more you tell me now, the less we'll have to do later, you know." And so I proceed to tell, his name was Chad Couples from Bluffton, Ohio. I proceed to tell him the worst stories from the last 6 years, you know. And yeah, there's some pretty horrific stories that I end up telling him. I told him when I was about 12 years old, Mondo had forced me to perform oral sex on him. And when I was doing that, Mondo ejaculates and it hit me in the face. And Mondo laughed at me and he said that was crucial, is what he told me. And over the course of the years, like much like he would say, "You're too pretty to be a boy," he would, whenever we would see something in public that was like crazy, he would say, "Man, that's crucial. That's crucial." And it was like a way of taking a knife and just sticking it in me like, "Remember what I did to you," you know? And I tell Chad that. And I tell him, you know, several other stories of things that he had done. And I walk out and I don't really remember a whole lot more from that day. Chad eventually leaves. He goes up to Bluffton, Ohio. They end up getting an out of custody confession from Mondo, which is a really big deal. They had not arrested him, and they get him to confess to a few things, not everything, but a few things. And I went home. I went home. A few months later, I hear that Mondo accepts a plea deal. So initially, he was charged with 10 felony counts of abuse between me and Jacob. So he had abused me and Jacob for about 10 years between the two of us. It was about 5 and 5. And I mean, several hundred occasions with just me alone, you know. So I don't know how much Jacob endured, but it was very much the same as me, if not worse. And he they offer him a plea deal. So he takes 4 of the charges. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison back in 2011. So he would be free today to do whatever the hell he wants to do, which is scary because, you know, he ran a haunted house out of his mom's front porch in that small town. And at the end of the haunted house, he would be at the end of it handing candy out to all these kids. So it kind of shows you the kind of person that he was. It's a very like classic child predator case. But he was sentenced to 10 years in 2011. He'd be free today. Fortunately enough, in 2019, he died in prison. He died about a year before he was supposed to get out. He requested parole several times and then eventually dies, supposedly of a staph infection in prison. I was in Afghanistan when he died. I got a phone call from my wife and she said, hey, you know, Mondo died today in prison. And, you know, I kind of just was like, you know, whatever, you know, not a big deal. Just kind of kept it moving. I was in Afghanistan at the time, so I didn't really have time to think about it anyways. But yeah, that was basically the end of my childhood, like trauma and the extent of all the abuse and like bad shit that I went through as a kid. But I went home and, you know, the initial impact on me was like, I don't have anything to do this weekend. I really wasn't like, I had already been through so much shit that it was just like another thing, you know? And I got my braces off like a couple weeks later, had a fresh new smile. I was like going to the fairgrounds, hanging out with all the girls now. And I was a funny social butterfly. I just started like clicking and fitting in with all these kids, making everybody laugh. And I just moved on with my life. Never went to therapy. Never saw anybody for it. Never saw a crime victim services. Just moved on with my life, you know, and eventually joined the Army when I was 17. Going to the Army. So I went to basic training between my junior and senior year. Then after my senior year, went back to more training with the Army. And when I was like 19 or 20, I ended up going full-time active duty in the Army and served for 9 years. While I was in the military, I met my wife. We had both of our children during my time in the military. I went to Afghanistan in 2019. And shortly after returning home from Afghanistan, I got out of the military. And since I've been out, you know, that's kind of where a lot of my, like, I guess, success or accolade, you could say, has kind of stacked up over the last few years. And like I said earlier, it was likely more out of just building this identity of being a badass than anything else, you know. Yeah. I was accomplishing all these things just to prove to people like Seth wasn't a bitch or Seth wasn't like this weak person, you know. And so that's kind of where my life has taken me, you know, and published my book in December of 24 and became a bestseller on Amazon in February. And now I'm like traveling and speaking and sharing my story with the world. And just, it's been a hell of a ride. It's been a hell of a journey. It's incredible. It's incredible to do what I'm doing now, to come from where I've come from. I'm so lucky and blessed and grateful for all of the things that have gone my way, you know, despite all of the heartbreaking and tragedy that I've gone through, you know. So, yeah, that's
the greatest shit I've ever heard. That's the greatest shit I've heard.
Yeah. Let me
go for it.
Powered through a monster and a half a bottle of water.
Yeah.
That was the greatest shit I've ever heard. Like, the guy can't catch a break.
Yeah, we complain. Gotta stop complaining, man. Ain't that bad. I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what is your perspective on this whole thing now with you being a father? Like, what is, like, you obviously living that, and now you have, you have your own child. So it's like, I don't know, like, has that shaped your perspective as a parent, as a father, as like, like, are you super protective? Are you?
I'm certainly protective, but I don't think I'm overprotective. Like, I try not to be a helicopter parent, but I would say I'm very aware. I know what's going on. I see things that are happening. I see behaviors that people do. I see the things that I do or that my wife does or that other adults do that shape a child's behaviors. Example would be like my son, when he turned 3 or 4, we had a birthday party and we had it at this public place and one of his teachers was there. And in the South, it's very common for older women to kiss kids, or, in churches, you see it a lot of churches and like preschools and things like that. And his preschool teacher was there and she picked my son up and gave him a kiss when we first got there, kiss on like the cheek or the head. And, I was like, okay, yeah, we're not doing that again. And I knew it was going to happen again. So I stayed around my son towards the end of the party and she picked him up and kissed him again. And I very professionally, quietly, not to embarrass her, I just said, hey, don't kiss my kids. And she, out of like not intentionally being rude or disobedient, she kissed him again right there in front of me, and it was more probably out of like shock and embarrassment. Like, are you serious? And it was, she probably just like panicked and I don't know, thought that I was just kidding. But I was like, no, I'm serious. Do not kiss my children, And a lot of people would probably look at that like, you're being crazy or you're an asshole. Why would you embarrass her? And it's not my son's responsibility, or I don't want him to be the one who needs to decide on who kisses him or doesn't kiss him, or when it's okay, when it's not okay. So like it's things like this as a parent that you see. Like, I kiss my kids. I don't kiss them on the mouth. I kiss my kids on the top of the head. I don't know that there's a benefit to kissing your kid in the mouth. People do it all the time, and I'm not shaming those people that do it.
Tom Brady.
Well, yeah,
It's
but
fucking weird.
yeah, but it is strange. It's and when you could question somebody about it, it's like, why are you kissing your kid in the mouth? It's like, it's my kid. They're 2, they're 3, they're 4, they're 5. It's like, okay, well, for one, I just don't know the benefits of that, but 2, it's strange. And then when you allow strangers to kiss your kid, now your kid has to, at what point does it become weird, right, for your child, right? Is it when maybe it's on the chest, maybe it's on the arm, maybe it's somewhere else, So you become more aware. Like, I've become more aware of those things. Kids don't need to be alone with other adults. They don't need to be alone. If there's anybody who's trying to hang out with my kids or be with my kids or asking for alone time with the kids, or, hey, let's go to your room, or let's do this, or like, if any of those things happen, I become more aware. I don't think I'm like overprotective because you got to let your kids experience.
Yeah.
They got to fall down. They got to get hurt. The adversity is good. Being upset and crying and being sad is good. Getting in fights is good. Letting them sort out their differences, with control is good, So, I mean, that's one way. And then as far as like not growing up with a father, like, I've learned that I try to do everything I can as far what a father should do for my children. I'm trying to raise my son to be a man, I'm trying to raise my daughter to be a lady, and protect them and, challenge them. But also, I love them like relentlessly. When I tell you I love my fucking kids, man, like every single night I put them to bed. I like hold them and I hug them and I just tell them, like, I look at them like, hey, and they're a kid, so they don't even, you'll be talking to them, and kids are savages. You just be talking to them and then say some like real deep shit. Like, how much I freaking love you. And they'll be like, Daddy, how big is the moon? And I'm like, look, motherfucker, like, I'm talking to you right now. But I would like literally tell them that. I'd be like, dog, do you hear what I'm saying to you? Like, I love you, bro. I love you so much. And so, like, kids, that's just how I am with them. But, and with that too, as far as how it's affected me, like when I hug my kids like that and I love my kids like that, it hurts sometimes because I think about, like, man, I wish I would have had somebody like this. Like, I wish, when I see my father-in-law, especially when he holds my kids and hugs my kids and loves on them, when I see my father-in-law do it from a distance, I'm just like, damn, man. And I wrote about him in my book too. Like I'm just so thankful my kids have what they have now. You know, they have the parents and they have the grandparents and the family and the support system that they have. And we actually have a third child on the way. We just found out today he's going to be a boy. So what's even more interesting that I've thought about is that my first two kids, when they were on the way and born, and as I've been raising them, I was so destroyed and jacked up in my head, you know, because I had not talked about my problems. I had not processed all of my trauma. I had not talked about any of this shit. And so when my kids were born, my first two, like I was depressed, anxious, freaking borderline emotionally abusive towards my wife. I was very manipulative towards her and just treated her like shit. And so I feel so bad for my first two children and my wife for the experience that I gave them for the first few years, you know. Not that I wasn't a horrible person, but it just wasn't, I didn't have the love that I have now in my heart, you know. So for this third child that I have, like I was so terrified for so long to have a kid and to have a second kid or a third kid. But now I've got this third one on the way, and I've done all this work to like process and heal from like all my shit, that like this third one, like, bro, I can't wait for his ass to show up. Like I'm just like so excited to be able to give him like the kind of love that he deserves, and also but to be able to support my wife the way that she needs to be supported, you know, because I was in a bad place when I had my first two, you know. So it's a lot, but there's good and bad in all of it, you know. I just try to make the most out of what I have now, you know. Yeah.
Do you believe in God?
I'm not a Christian, no.
Do you believe in any God?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting conversation. I don't know what's out there, you know. I'm not necessarily a Christian. I don't know if I am like a faith or like the human spirit. You know, I'm not really sure what I believe, but I'm not like particularly religious or Christian or anything like that. And I'm not against it. I think a lot of times when I get asked that question, or, you know, I don't hate it. People tell me all the time they'll pray for me, and I appreciate those things. I always appreciate the kind words. But I do think that there is this unnecessary pressure to be a Christian. I know that for me growing up, everybody told me just pray and like, we'll pray for you and God's got you. And like, for me, it just never stuck. And it's not like, I don't hate God. I don't hate religion. I'm not like, if God was real, why did all these bad things? That's not my mentality. I think that's a victim perspective of, you know, of looking at things. It's just, for me, it's like, just never was my thing, you know? But it's interesting. I do think there was an unnecessary pressure for it. I think there's unnecessary pressures for religion and therapy. I think therapy's great. Like, I've never been, but I know people who have, and it helps them. I'm not a Christian. I know Christians and God has helped them, right? And I can understand how that would work and how it happens. I understand all of those things, but I don't think it's the end all be all. And I think that we put so much pressure on, like, you have to go to therapy, or you have to become a Christian, or you have to turn to God, that I know that when I was in that place, even as an adult, like just a year or 2 years ago, that if I came out and like, I would never heal if I didn't become a Christian. And for me, being a Christian just wasn't in the cards. It's just not my thing. And so because of that, I'm like, I'm never going to, like, people will never accept me, you know? And I haven't been as open about that as I am now until as of recently, because you get a lot of hate for not being a Christian, you know? The last interview I did on Soft Red Underbelly, I talk about that, you know, and I'm not hating on Christians. I'm not hating on anybody. You do whatever you want to do, whatever works for you. But I get a lot of hate for that. And, you know, it sucks, man. It sucks that you can't just talk about the way that you've healed and fixed yourself, without people putting this like unnecessary pressure that if you don't turn to God, you'll never be saved, you know?
Yeah, it's a side, you know. It's like, I don't know, if you love the Pittsburgh Steelers and I ask you, do you believe in the Pittsburgh Steelers? And you say no. You're like, what the fuck do you mean you don't believe in the Pittsburgh Steelers? I know that's like kind of an elementary example, but I I think it's very easy to understand why you believe in what worked for you, and Christianity didn't work for you, and neither did therapy. That didn't work for you either. And I think it's sad. I think it's sad that people, like there are people that are bad representations of the belief in God. There are people that are bad representations of how you need to heal and push therapy down your throats. And there's also people out there like Mondo that are just like devils on earth, I guess, my follow-up to that question would be, what, so then you've had this crazy experience, right? Have you thought about why this happened to you? Or do you think this is like a happenstance?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, bad situation, I mean, with all that being said, there's a level of gratitude I can possess with that, Shit happens sometimes. Life is hard, for some people. For some, it's, my story is a drop in the bucket compared to others. There are people out there that have certainly had much worse. And not to compare in the sense of, or just to compare, but comparing to realize like how blessed and lucky like I am to be just to be born in America, right? First off, where I had the opportunity to do what I'm doing now, because nowhere else in the world can I do this in the way that I've done it. So that's a strong take there too. But then there's also a level of intensity and consistency that comes with trauma and how bad it is, right? So things happen to me. They happen consistently. They were rather intense, but it could have been much, much worse, So I think when bad things happen to people, they tend to hang on to them because it's like my little evil cloud that just, it follows me around. And as long as I have this trauma, as long as I have this pain and these problems, that's my scapegoat, right? Anything that happens to me, all I got to say is, look at my trauma. Look what I've been through, And so that alone, that means I don't have to heal. That means I don't have to do anything. It means I don't have to process anything. That means I don't have to move on, So I guess, I do think it's a unlucky situation in my opinion, On the flip side of that, most people tell me that all of these people that have come into my life is God, right? It's God's plan, or it's God's way, or this is the path that I was chosen to be on because I got through it, and I respect that. I understand that and that thinking too. So, but in my opinion, I would say it's bad luck, time and place. So
are you worried about your kids growing up, going on YouTube and hearing your story?
That's a good one. That's a good question. So my only concern with that is that my kids get bullied for like, your dad's gay, or your dad was raped, or your dad was this or that, whatever, right? So that would be my concern, and there's not really much I can do about that. So I've got two options. I can either let it bother me and, this thing that I cannot control, I can let that thing kind of take over my mind, or I can say, I can't control that, so I'm going to do the best that I can regardless, right? And I think that if I do the best that I can, that will go into my children, right? The way I live my life, my children will likely live their lives the same way. They're in some form or fashion. So as long as I possess some resiliency and humility, when that time comes, that I explain to my children, like, you know what? Yeah, daddy's got a story, and a lot of bad things happen to me, and people might make fun of you for that because your dad went through this or that, but you can't control it. So don't let it bother you, right? You will be offended or bothered or pissed off or hurt by whatever you agree to. Okay. So if somebody tells you you're stupid and ugly, you have the option of being offended or not. Like, that's if you agree to that, okay, you say what you want. Like you're fine. You talk and you say, you believe what you want to believe. I'm going to believe what I believe. So that's kind of the message that I give my kids. As it relates to like them understanding what happened to me, that'll come with time. They're way too young right now to really get it. My daughter does ask me, like, and my son too, why do I travel? Why am I gone all the time? And why did I write a book? And so, or they'll ask me like about my mom or my dad. And so my answer to that is basically, daddy had a hard time growing up. Daddy didn't have very good parents. People hurt daddy, but it's okay now because daddy's okay. Like, I'm stronger and I'm bigger and better for all these things. And now daddy helps other people get through their own problems. In fact, when I do go speak, sometimes when I come home, my daughter will ask me like, did you help them? And so that's kind of cool to hear, like a little 6-year-old girl ask me that question. But yeah, as far as them getting like, bullied or comments at school, the most I can do with that is just lead them the right way so that they handle it, the right way when the time comes.
Yeah. You had one?
Yeah. I want to ask you, because I'm a little bit on the opposite side of things. I'm a believer in fate. When I asked you about God, Christianity is, I wasn't even really speaking more so about that. God, how I used to view God was just like this ethereal presence that in all things, this like very intelligent design. And I believe that Chad couples, I believe that he was a sign of God, whether that's a Christian God or a Muslim God or the air and the wind and the birds. It doesn't matter to me. And I'm looking at you now, and I'm looking at your story and this book and what you're kind of doing, and I'm going, that's fucking badass.
Yeah.
And I think that as far as purpose in life, I admire you, bro. And I think that you're taking this horrible thing, this, but you're like literally turning it into an AR-15, and you're saying fuck you, Mondo. Whether it's to fuck you, Mondo, or it's like I love you. What's your son's name?
Jameson.
I love you, Jameson.
Yeah.
I love you, like, or to your wife now, right? And I think it's amazing, bro. It's alchemy, And so my question is do you regret? Do you wish you never got raped growing up?
Yeah, that's everything that I went through is unfortunate, right? I think there was a time not too long ago where I would answer that question differently, where I would say I would never want to experience that, and not that I do want to experience those things, but those things made me who I am today. And because of the man that I am today, I get the opportunity and the privilege to share my story in a way that is real, raw, authentic, gut-wrenching, and emotional, but it allows other people to heal. It allows other people to do what I'm doing, which is heal, overcome, become better, happier, loving, like all of those things, I would not be here if another man did not tell his story. Another man named Clark Fredericks. He lives up in New Jersey. He is fucking incredible. I saw him tell his story on Soft Red Underbelly. He has a very similar story. Slight differences, but nonetheless, he was raped about the same age that I was by a man. And my whole life, I thought like, nobody's ever going to understand me. Nobody's ever going to get this, and he was the first person that I had seen that talked about it the way that he did. And when I saw that video, I said, okay, man, like I got to tell my story. I got to do my thing. And so, not too long ago, I probably would have answered that question with like, I would never want to go through that. I wish I would have never went through it because my life would have been XYZ, would have been this or that, right? If I wouldn't have gone through those things. But going through those things made me who I am, and I got through it. So in that regard, I'm glad that what I went through, because I got through it. I'm one of the few that got through those things, and I'm able to come out on the other end. Just a functioning human being alone is pretty rare. So for me to be able to talk the way that I talk and speak and process and deliver a message that's understandable, and inspiring for people, for that reason, I'm glad for everything that I went through, you know.
If you could say anything to, if you could have one conversation with Mondo, what would you say to him?
What happened? Like, what happened to you? I'd ask him that, you know. I think we have all these questions of like, why did this person do this? Why would you do that? Why are you an asshole? You know, why did you abuse this person? Why did you do this or that? And we don't ever ask the person like, man, what happened to you? Like, what happened that made you that kind of person? That's likely, you know, why they are the way they are. You know, when I was growing up, teachers all the time, Seth, why can't you behave? Why can't you stop talking? You know, why are you sleeping in class? Why are you misbehaving? Why are you fighting? You know, nobody ever stopped me and asked me like, Seth, what happened? Like, is everything okay? You know, what's going on at home? You know, nobody ever really, nobody did that in a way that provoked me enough to speak up, you know? So that would be my question. I don't hate the guy. I mean, I don't hate my mom. Don't hate my dad. Don't hate Mondo. Don't have any hate for anybody in this world. I don't have any resentment for any of them. Not anymore. And to be able to like forgive in that way, to truly forgive people, that's one of the most powerful things you can do in regards to like recovery and healing and things like that, you know? But you've got to be like, you have to actually forgive them, you know? It doesn't matter what they've done to you. Because resentment is just like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, you know? So.
If a kid, because you know what's fucking crazy to me? How often this happens to kids. I personally am a Christian. It's because I think there's a massive issue with sex. Well, it's not why I'm a Christian, but I understand the premarital sex thing. Because I look at sex and I'm like, why is every time I hear something so deviant and perverted, it has to do with sex? It like shocks me. Because it also happened to you when you were 5 by someone else. Mm-hmm. And it's popping up everywhere. Now, I don't know if I was living in a different world growing up, but like I didn't even think these things, like people were capable of these things. So I guess I'm just following this up with, there's going to be a lot of people that watch this that have been sexually abused at a young age. And I don't know how you have the attitude that you have about it. I don't know how you are strength beyond the shadows. I don't know how you are so strong about it. You know, just to a kid that was in your position, where do they even begin after they've been sexually abused?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. You know, like I said a minute ago, like the forgiveness piece, first off, is going to help. So I lived most of my life resenting not even my mom or my dad or Mondo. Like I didn't really care about them. I resented everybody else. I hated everybody else because they had not been through what I've been through. They complained about their coffee being late. They, you know, whatever first world problems you had. Like I hated everybody for those things because when I saw somebody with their parents, when I saw somebody in their nice house with their nice car, like that shit pissed me off so much because I wanted the world to burn. I wanted people to feel pain the way that I had felt pain. And that's what resentment does to you. It turns you into this like animal. That's the reason why I was a horrible husband for a long time. I met my wife. We got married. We had kids. My wife comes from a completely different side of the tracks, you know, than I do. She has got both of her parents are well off, you know, brothers, sisters, grandma, grandpa. Like she's got the whole family package. She was a college athlete, like, you know, just she lived a completely different life than I did. And so while I loved her and married her, but I hated her for all of these other things, you know. I hated her for everything that she did in her life and everything that she was because she did not come from where I come from, you know. And a lot of that too is self-worth. When those things happen to you as a kid and like you don't have somebody to reinforce your how special or loved you are as you're growing up, you'll grow up with these like self-worth, quote unquote, daddy issues, right? Or mommy issues, which I would argue that I have both. I have a mother wound and a father wound. And when you grow up with those things, it makes it very hard for you to feel valuable. It makes it very hard for you to feel like you fit in or you belong. Like I talked about earlier, right? Maybe as you asked, how I feel before I share my story, well, when I get up on that stage, sometimes I deal with like all these, like, I don't even belong here. Like I am not the one that they want here. I was never wanted in my life. I was never cared for in my life. So like, why do these people care about me now? So to get over all of those things, that's like some of the things that a lot of people battle with when they go through sexual abuse. And sexual trauma, while we're on the topic, is so detrimental. It's arguably the worst trauma that you can go through. Sexual trauma and combat trauma, or first responders like trauma. The reason being is because, so statistically speaking, you said a lot of kids do go through this. So statistically speaking, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 4 boys will be sexually abused before they're 18. Over 78% of the time, around 78% of the time, it's by somebody in your immediate household. So it's mom, dad, brother, sister. Somebody in your immediate household is doing it. Over 98% of the time, it's somebody in your immediate circle of trust. So inside the house or family, close family, friends, relatives, church members, little league coaches. It's somebody who you trust and and what makes, so that kind of is a testament to what makes sexual trauma so devastating, is because it's usually by somebody that you trust and that you love. And not only are they hurting you, but they are also loving you at the same time in different ways. So they will make your breakfast, teach you how to ride a bike, throw the football with you. But then when nobody's looking, they're violating you and ripping your innocence from your body, right? That's what makes sexual trauma so devastating. Similarly with combat and like first responder PTSD, you're going to war with your buddies, and maybe there's 10 of you in a team, and you guys are all playing cards and you're shooting the shit and you're making fun of each other and fucking with each other every day. And you're just the best of friends, right? But then somebody gets killed. So for the rest of your life, anytime you like have this memory of playing spades, you're like, damn, man, I remember playing spades with like so-and-so and now he's dead. So that's what makes this kind of trauma so devastating, is because when I see somebody with their father or somebody with a friend, or I see a child with an adult, I'll have these memories of like, damn, man, or these things I don't remember, right? Where I didn't have a father. So that's what makes it so devastating. So with all that being said, I say this with the most understanding and empathy for everybody who's going out there, going through this and suffering from the effects of all of these things, is that for you to move on with your life and to, live a good life, despite all of this tragic and heartbreaking shit that's happened to you, you got to accept it, acknowledge it. It is what it is. Shit happens. It's unfortunate. But we have the opportunity now to like make the decision to wake up tomorrow or today and say, you know what, fuck this, man. Like, I'm not living like this no more. I'm not living like a victim. I'm not living like some broken freaking piece of equipment or whatever. Like, I'm moving on with my life. I'm going to be happy. And gratitude, like, this is like a buzzword, right? Everybody talks about gratitude now, but it's like a skill. And along with many other things, gratitude, resiliency, emotional regulation, like those things are going to be the things that are going to help you get out of whatever hole you're living in. So if you've been sexually abused or whatever, being able to wake up every day and say, like, I'm here, I'm good, I'm alive, I'm going to do good things today, and being able to regulate your emotions in that way, that positive reinforcement, it's a skill. So with that, it takes repetition. It takes like intent. It takes like intentional like delivery of said reps, right? So I literally wake up every day like I'm just so glad to be here. Like I go to work Monday. Hey Seth, how you doing, man? I'm freaking good, dude. I'm just stoked to be here. I'm glad to be alive. I'm so happy to be here. And it's like probably to the point where people are like, fuck this guy. Like, what I'm saying? Like he's too happy, But that it's a thing you have to build, man. And what's funny about that is what happens is people will get like that and then they'll have one bad day. And that one bad day, they'll just say, fuck it, like I quit. Every time I try and do better, if I fail, so I give up. It's like going on a diet. You know, you're trying to lose weight, and then one day you wake up 3 pounds heavier than the day before, and you're like, why do I even try? Why do I even try? If every time I try to become successful, every time I try to do better, I have a bad day. So if you're trying to be a better husband or a wife, trying to be a better spouse, and you come home and you're nice and you give your wife a hug and you give her a kiss and you compliment her and everybody's happy, and like you got like 2-3 days of like flirting and love and happiness, and then one day somebody fucks up and you have a bad day, and then you're like, you know what, this is why I don't try. Like, this is why I want a divorce, because every time I try and do something, it just goes south anyways. And so we live in this state of like wanting to just give up immediately, and I lived like that for so long. So when I say I say this with understanding and empathy, like I really do mean it. I know how hard it is to go home and just like love somebody after you've been abused, to go home and just love somebody and be like, I love you, give them a hug, give them a kiss. Like, I couldn't do that with my own wife. I couldn't touch her, couldn't look at her, I just hated her, man. And so for me to fix my marriage, I mean, I tried to divorce my wife multiple times because it was just easier to walk away. It's just easier to quit. It's just easier to give up, you know? When you're living in hell, you're living down in that basement and the house is on fire, it's easier to just stay down there and burn to death. You know, climbing out fucking hurts. You got to grab the ladder, and the ladder's hot and it burns, and you're going to feel it, you know? But if you can grab that ladder and feel that pain for just a few minutes, you can get out, and then you can get out of the house and you can live this life where you're not burning in hell. But it just hurts. I mean, it was physically like painful for me to hug my wife or to hold her hand or to give her a kiss or to tell her I love her or to compliment her. Like, it was hard to do those things, you know? And that's what happens with people like me who go through a lot of shit. You just live the rest of your world thinking that like you're the only one who's been through it, and you're all alone, and you've got this cloud that's following you, and it's making everything, you know, worse for you. So I think, you know, the last thing I would say with all that is you can't control what you can't control, you know? And so whatever you have in your life now, like, you got to do the best with it. Whatever you've been through, like, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And shit happens, man. Like, you've got to be able to stand up and be like, you know what? It's not my identity. It's not who I am. That's, you know, I started this conversation off like that, right? Like, yes, I was sexually abused. Yeah, I was raped by another man when I was a kid, but that's not my identity. You know, I don't walk up to people and say, my name is Seth and this is my life. You know, like, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I'm other things. You know, I like football, I do jiu-jitsu, like, I like other shit, you know, like, there's other things about me that are far more important and interesting than the things that I've gone through, you know? So I think we can easily be consumed by this identity of the things that we've gone through. You know, you see it a lot with addicts, you know. I don't know if I was an addict that I would call myself an addict if I was off the drugs, you know. I don't know why I would live by that I don't know that I would, because I don't call myself a survivor, you know. I survived, but I don't call myself that, because you're putting this like label, you know, diagnosis. You get diagnosed with something. I could have whatever diagnosis I want. I know I could go to any therapist right now, tell them what happened to me, and they'll be like, yeah, you fit the bill. And they'll give me whatever they want. You know, they'll write it all up, give me this fat ass subscription, and I'll be living off medicine for the rest of my life because I've got 6 different diagnoses, you know. And then I could tell everybody that I can act any way I want because I have PTSD and bipolar disorder and trauma and this and that. And instead I'm like, yeah, fuck that, dude. I'm good. Like, I don't want the medicine. I just want to be happy. And the best thing for that is just telling yourself every single day, like, I'm going to do this shit. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what kind of win I'm going to get today, whether it's making my bed or running 100 miles or competing in jiu-jitsu or fucking writing a book. Like, I don't know what kind of win I'm going to stack today, but I'm going to stack a win, and it's going into column, and we're going to get up and do this shit again tomorrow, no matter what, you know?
Very good.
just that was I love that, but that's a little bit more of a male perspective.
Sure.
How do you think a female can, same type of thing?
Yeah. I mostly talk to females. mostly talk to females. I get most of my questions from females. I get a few here and there from men, but most of my questions come from females. And, coming from a man, take it with a grain of salt, but I would say it's much of the same. There's nothing like unique about me. I'm not like talented. I'm not special in any way. I don't have anything that anybody else can't have. I haven't done anything that anybody else can't do. The difference between me and most people and most high achievers is it's a mindset. It's a mindset is all it is. And if you treat your mindset like a skill, like it's something that you can develop and learn, then you can, if you treat your mindset like it's this gift that's been given to people because they were fortunate enough to have whatever they have, yeah, you'll never obtain it. You'll never get it. That's
you like coddle yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you'll just give up. People ask me all the time, like, how did you write a book, or how did your book become a bestseller, or how did you do this? Like, you must have got lucky, or, you must be when I compete in jiu-jitsu, and they're like, you're strong, you're like naturally gifted. It's like, bro, there's nothing. I have no natural talent or ability at anything. I was a little bit smarter than most kids.
Me too.
But I have there's nothing special about me, man. Like, I just decided that I was going to do better, and that took a long time. I've fucked up so many more times than I have been successful in my life. I've missed more opportunities than I've taken advantage of. But you got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, man, am I doing this, or is the world doing this?
Well, appreciate you for sharing that, and really going into the details of everything, because I'm sure it's not easy. I know you've done it before, but I'm sure every time you kind of have to almost put yourself back in those moments,
right.
Because I've spoke about that a lot, about just my mom. Like, when I speak about it, I can put myself back there. I remember specific moments, like when my mom passed away during that time, and it's never easy to talk about, so yeah, it's cool that you have the ability to do that and not get emotional about it either and stuff like that. So yeah, just thank you. I really appreciate you joining us, and I hope this helped a lot of people.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you guys.
What belt are you in jiu-jitsu?
I'm a blue belt.
Let's go.
Yeah. Shitty blue belt.